to the strategy session. Someday my voice will break. Hey, folks, it's Rick, and welcome back to the strategy session. I am your host tonight, joined by Joe Trippi and by Brooke Harrington, who is one of the smartest writers out there, looking at our current moment. As you can see, she is at E.B. Harrington on the various socials. And we're delighted to have her on tonight because I really want to talk through some of her understanding of the sort of weird oligarch moment we're in, and to sort of psychoanalyze some of the things that are happening around the Elon Musk situation in Washington. So, Brooke, thanks for coming on the show tonight, and tell me a little bit about where you see the state of play right now with this very strange group of fellow travelers around Trump.
It's the rapid scheduled disassembly of the United States. Just like one of X's rockets, it's coming apart as we watch it.
You know, I wish it wasn't. I wish that wasn't such a correct analogy, but it does seem to be this massive group of incredibly wealthy people who have surrounded Trump very deliberately, very strategically. They're the kind of people you studied. And folks, Brooke is a professor of sociology at Dartmouth and wrote a tremendous book called Offshore, Stealth, Wealth, and the New Colonialism. These people are unimaginably rich. They're unimaginably financially secure. They could stop making money right now and they would never stop making money. And these are people with, fleets of private jets, not just one. They're at a level of wealth we have never seen in this country, even during the Gilded Era, in terms of the proportion of wealth they own of the country. So what strikes everyone is, I think, a little strange, Brooke, and I would love to get your thoughts on this, is their big objective is slashing programs and money for the poorest Americans right now. So talk to us a little bit about, they're cutting the FAA, they're cutting Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security staffers, which will mean that the services to those people who get them are lower. They're cutting, the easy stuff in their minds, like arts funding and USAID. Tell me about what's motivating this group of amazingly wealthy people to screw so many amazingly not wealthy people.
It's like they're running FDR's first 100 days in reverse. Remember when FDR came into office in 19...
Not that old, Brooke, but yes.
I know you weren't there, but we all learned about this in school, right? The
Sure.
famous first 100 days of the New Deal, where he went through Congress, he passed all this legislation, basically in a massive effort to restore public institutions and public faith in government.
Mm-hmm.
What we've seen from Doge in 4 weeks and 2 days is this massive unwinding of many of those public institutions, and certainly of public trust.
Right.
When we learned that the Doge boys were into the payment system of the Treasury, who is that supposed to help or reassure? That's the system that services the national debt of the United States. So if you're like me and your grandparents bought you a Treasury bill or a bond when you were little because it's the most secure investment you can possibly make. Well, guess what? That's not the most secure investment in the world. If you have 19-year-old college dropouts messing around with the code of the master payment system of the Treasury Department going, oops, what's that line for?
Yeah.
And by the way, many governments all over the world own trillions of dollars in those Treasury instruments. And so If we screw around with those payments, it doesn't just take down our economy or your Social Security payments. It takes down the whole world economy, in a way that would make 2008 look like amateur hour.
Well, Joe, weigh in here, because these guys really are so disconnected from ordinary life. What do you think the political implications of this will eventually be when people understand that all this is being cut so that these assholes can get a tax cut?
it's not just tax cut. It's the government contracts. It's I mean Elon Musk. It's get to Mars, baby, and leave everybody else in the dirt. I mean, in other words, these guys, they're all basically invincible. I feel like there's a lot of people in the United States who are born on third base and believe they deserve a walk to home plate.
Right.
These
Thought they
guys,
hit a triple.
these guys, like, no, these guys think we all owe them. We need to get out of their way because they are so omnipresent, so smart, so sure of the path we have to take. And if that means leaving millions and millions, even a billion or two people eating dirt, they don't care. They think they're on a mission of their own being, their own enrichment, their own, no regulations on what they want to do because what they want to do is so important and big and meaningful and insane in my view, but that's beside the point. That's what they think.
Right.
Can I just disagree on one small point? I don't think they're doing this just for a tax break because most of the billionaires have already solved the tax problem.
Sure.
ProPublica reported, I think last year, that people like Musk and Bezos go whole years paying zero in income taxes, and they're not breaking any laws when they're doing it. It's trivial. I mean, you pay some pretty high-priced professionals to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, but you can avoid paying most taxes in America, even if you're a billionaire. So I think the political project of these broligarchs is actually something much more sinister that a lot of people in the media and in the Democratic Party just haven't grokked yet, which is these guys are really serious about what Bannon called deconstructing the administrative state.
Mm-hmm.
Back, if I can go historical for a moment.
Please, absolutely.
You may remember from history class that not long after Franklin Delano Roosevelt saved the butts of the rich people in America through the New Deal, they immediately turned on him and they're like, well, now that you've saved the country, we want to kick the legs out from under you. And they tried to do this thing called the business plot, where they tried to recruit a Marine general named Smedley Butler in order to be the figurehead of what was essentially a Doge-like project to seize the democracy of this country and turn it over to business interests. And, 90 plus years later, the business plot has essentially succeeded via Musk and Trump. And now it's all technocratic. But these broligarchs have been talking for a decade or more about their desire to basically end democracy. Mm-hmm. Like, I don't know if your listeners know who Curtis Yarvin is.
I was just going to bring up Curtis.
Yeah, I mean, Curtis Yarvin is
creepy and yet terrifying.
Yeah, and he has the charisma of a school shooter, and yet he's viewed as this political savant and philosopher by broligarchs like Peter Thiel and Mark Andreessen.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And, Yarvin is like, you know what? We should have corporate monarchy. That's the only valid and legitimate form of rule. And because these guys all come from the Silicon Valley, they put this kind of pseudoscientific gloss on what used to be known as the divine right of kings, which is the idea that some people are born to rule the rest of us and we're their serfs. And that's what the broligarchs believe. And they put this pseudoscientific gloss of high T alpha males on top of it, or high IQ, but it means the same thing as the divine right of kings, that they get to rule us. And our only purpose in existence is to serve them through a corporate monarchy.
Right, to serve them and not get in their way. That's what we're saying the same thing. I think this is not about tax cuts. This is about we can rule. We want to rule because we're better than all of you. And Donald Trump turned the keys of the car over to these guys, to Elon Musk and these guys, without maybe not fully understanding the implications, or maybe enthralled with, let's go do that. But that's not my point. they now have the car keys, and they are taking us all for the ride that they believed should be theirs from the beginning.
So let me ask you both this. There is a tension between the Broligarch class and the hyper-populist MAGA class. And I would say, Bannon is pretty much one of the central leaders of that. Stephen Miller to a lesser degree, and Russell Vought. Those are guys from the populist revolutionary class. Where do you see this clash coming to a head? I think it's on immigration, where Homan and Miller are one axis, and Homan, Miller, and Bannon are one axis, and Thiel and Musk and Sachs are another. I'm curious where you see that conflict coming to a head, because I think it inevitably will, because the populist wing of MAGA is expecting a very different outcome than what they're going to get.
I fully agree with you. And I've been watching this over the last few weeks, and it's been really clear that, one camp really needs low-cost immigration, especially of people from places like India, basically cannon fodder for the tech bros.
Right.
Whereas as you say, the nativist wing of Trump's coalition is like vehemently, aggressively opposed to all of that. And what that wing has going for it is violence, basically the threat of violence. Do what we say or else, Whereas the bros have money. And what I've been watching really closely to try and figure out is which way does Trump lean when he has to choose? And so far, he's consistently leaned toward the broligarchs. He's leaned toward the money and away from the violence. And to me, that is very telling about who actually runs things in the White House. That, God knows that American democracy was not Trump's to sell any more than Greenland is Trump's to buy. But he sold it anyways. And now, we see the fruits of that in Musk acting as though he's executed a hostile takeover, and he's doing what he did at X, which is rifling through the personnel files at the Office of Personnel Management and going through the financials at the Treasury and the IRS and so forth.
Joe?
No, I think that's exactly right. I think that, and that's where I do get into, I guess, I think Trump knowingly turned the keys over to them, but the damage that they're doing every day is for their own purposes. I don't think they're even for Donald Trump's agenda. It's their own purpose. It's Elon Musk's own agenda. All teeter teal, all of them, and that's why they are going into places like Veterans Affairs, all these places that are like directly impact the MAGA and the things that the average MAGA blue collar rural supporter supports, and they don't care. They've won this with their money, and they just want to go do what anything that gets them what they want. They don't care what they leave in their wake. The question is, at what point does this impact enough MAGA voters to change that? Violence, etc., state ban, that whole wedge. When does it explode? Because I think it's inevitable that it will eventually. And does it explode in violence too? By the way,
sure. I do think Joe and I were talking to our colleague at the Lincoln Project, Trygve Olsen, today, and he's from Wisconsin. He was talking about these Wisconsin farmers who discovered that their industry in Wisconsin sells a couple of $1 billion every year of cheese to USAID. And they were like, well, we wanted them to cut USAID, not cut our cheese contracts.
Keep your government hands off my Medicaid.
Hands off my Medicaid. That cognitive dissonance, to me, that's really when that pops, Joe, to your point, that's my real question. Does it lead to a moment where Trump, who has a very keen sense of what hurts him or helps him, Does it lead to Trump saying, aha, now you're gone, Elon. That's it. Today, Elon becomes the coffee boy who he barely knew. I'm just curious. Like, I don't know when. Yeah, as Lisa said, I hate Obamacare, but I love my Affordable Care Act insurance. I don't know when that moment is yet. I mean, we're at Lincoln. We're trying to stoke that as much as we can at the moment, because when it does start to hurt Trump politically, and say what you will about him, he has a feral sense of cunning as to things that help him or hurt him. I wonder how long it takes for him to throw Elon and the bros off the cliff, because maintaining power for him, he doesn't think he depends on their largesse anymore. So he's in some ways more dangerous to them now.
See, I'm not so sure about that. I mean, you saw that press conference where Elon was holding forth on his feet and his little boy was running around picking his nose, and Trump just sat there, and he sat there in a particular position that I called primate subservience.
Yes.
And I haven't seen him in that posture since Helsinki with Putin. That kind of, I don't know if people can see me, but I'm trying to do it kind of like hunched over.
Yep.
And it's like what a dog looks like after you hit it. It's almost pathetic to see. If it wasn't Donald Trump, you'd feel sorry for him. And that is not the posture of a man who's biding his time to kick out Elon Musk. It's the posture of a man who has to suck it up because he wants to not die in prison. Like, I don't know Donald Trump, and I'm not a Trump expert, but he's not responding like a man who thinks he has a choice.
Yeah, I think that was a humiliating scene for Trump. And the only other person he has that same affect with is Putin. You're right on that. So, Brooke, let me ask you this question. These guys around Trump, the Broligarch class around Trump, they are masters of the universe right now. They are enormously wealthy. They are enormously powerful at this moment. What is it that makes them vulnerable? What is it that makes them defeatable? What is it that people should be looking at to bring pressure on these people? Even if it seems like they're overmatched in the short term.
Two things. One, formal and institutional, and the other, informal and social. So the formal and institutional part are transnational institutions like the EU and NATO. Right. And that's one of the reasons, of course, that Putin has been so adamant about breaking both of them,
sure.
Starting with Brexit, because people like Musk and Putin and other broligarchs they're richer than can be contained within the framework of national law. Right. So in the 17 years I've been studying offshore finance, I've had wealth managers who are like the money butlers of these rich guys.
Sure.
They've said things to me like, who do you think is more powerful, my client or the government of France? And of course, it's a rhetorical question. And they say, well, obviously my client is, because my client can walk in and talk to the finance minister and say, look, I don't like this law that you have. And if you don't change it, I'm going to pick up my factory and move to another country. And you're going to get the blame for the loss of the jobs.
Right.
So do what I want. And you'd be surprised the number of times that national governments cave to that. Or you may remember when France tried to institute a wealth tax, and the actor Gerard Depardieu famously said, the French equivalent of screw you, I'm not paying. And he got himself a Russian passport, and there was this kind of creepy photograph of Putin giving him a big wet kiss as he handed over his passport. But that's what these people do. They get passports from multiple countries. And one of the other wealth managers I interviewed said, our clients are really scary people, and they regard nations as playthings and laws as things that exist to protect their property and their wealth, but otherwise are to be ignored. And the world is like a shopping mall of laws for them. They take what they want and they ignore what's inconvenient. So the only institutions that can constrain people like that are alliances of multiple countries. Mm-hmm. So that's why, when Elon Musk was being, I guess, sued is the right word, by the EU
Right.
He was being held to the laws of the EU. And before the inauguration, J.D. Vance, who was still just the vice president-elect, threatened the entire EU, saying, we're going to pull out of NATO unless you leave our boy alone, which is like, that's insane. Elon Musk was just a private citizen then. And there's the country threatening to retaliate against this institution that represents dozens of other countries for enforcing their sovereign laws on this private citizen. But that's an indication of these formal constraints being so powerful.
I mean, one thing that Joe and I and others have been talking about recently is with Elon Musk, there's one weak point in his entire suit of armor, and that's the stock price of Tesla, which is the wellspring of the vast majority of his wealth. And if that goes down, and Tesla is a company in deep trouble, if that starts to decline, I think Musk has still enormous power, but it would be interesting to see how that single pillar of his could be eroded by regulation, litigation, or public pressure.
I guess I have a question for you, which is, Republican politics really well, and you probably know some of the people who are on the board of Tesla. Like, where are the board of directors? Like, why aren't they doing something?
His board was a hand-picked board meant to be as passive as imaginable. And there's two kinds of boards in the world. There are boards with people who will challenge the management team to be better. And there are people that will say, Elon, would you like a $56 billion payday? Elon's board is of the latter sort. But public pressure can work on these companies. And we'll see if Musk is responsive to that, because there are plenty of scenarios where Tesla stock price goes down $10 and Elon's net worth goes down by $50-60 billion overnight. So something to be considered.
The other thing that
Joe, that's the sort of public pressure campaign that has had an effect before.
On
these companies.
Yeah, and it also affects him, I think. I don't know if you remember, but I think it was last year he sort of did a surprise appearance on one of Dave Chappelle's comedy shows, and he was booed by the whole audience, and he went back to X/Twitter offices, and apparently he was so distraught that some of his employees thought he might harm himself, and they were considering calling a wellness check. So that's an indication of something that really surprised me in all the years I've been studying the ultra-rich around the world, and that is their incredible, exquisite sensitivity to their reputation. You would think that if you had all the money in the world, you wouldn't care what other people thought of you. Maybe a select few, but that most people you could just ignore. But on the contrary, they seem to be more thin-skinned than the average bear. And that's what I meant by the second informal and social pressure we could bring to bear, which is simple stigmatization and shunning.
Man, shunning, that's OG stuff right there. That's old school. I love it.
I live in New England, where they used to do the stocks, Yeah.
Joe, what else do you think affects these guys?
His approval, I mean, Elon's favorable is like way off the charts unfavorable. So it's a question of, and I think it goes up every day with more, with every, Doge attack on whatever new agency is.
Right.
But how does that, I mean, I guess the political question is, does the lower he goes, does it impact Trump and the rest of the Bannon? I mean, does it create the place where Bannon and the rest of them
and Susie Wiles and whatnot can put the noose around his neck or not, for lack of a better way of putting it, but to get him the hell out of there, or is he just, as you said, is Trump so cowed by him in that, is again your body language thing, that he'll just let this thing roll, let him roll unencumbered,
throughout the whole, throughout his administration.
I suspect that there's going to be a moment when 2026 starts heaving into view a little more clearly that, and maybe it's happening now behind the scenes. We're not seeing it as much as we want yet. But I have a sense that there's going to be a moment where the pressure from members of Congress saying, "Oh dear God, Donald, you've got to put this grant back in my district. You've got to put this NHS grant back, this National Science Foundation grant, this ag grant. You got to put these controllers back in an air traffic control tower in my district." I have a sense that there's going to be a moment where Trump says, and Trump's team says, "Mr. President, we've got to do this for the politics of the moment," and Elon says no. That some of the magic may rub off at that point.
Gosh, I mean, if I could ask you a question, it would be like, at what point do the people that you know well, like the Susie Wiles and the Steve Bannons, at what point do they see their own survival on the line, like at risk due to someone like Elon Musk?
Bannon already does.
Yeah.
Bannon already does. Bannon is already living in fear that he's got to win or die. And somebody told me the other day, like, Bannon literally believes if he doesn't win that Elon will put him back in prison somehow, which is entirely a possibility, I guess. But for Susie and others who are sophisticated people looking to a future where, let's say there's a Democratic House and that Democratic House says, we're doing hearings. And that means that, the checkbooks better all open at that moment, because it's going to cost Susie Wiles or Stephen Miller or Tom Homan or any of these other people $500,000, $900,000 for lawyers to go do congressional hearings for a year. And Trump's not going to help them. Trump's not going to save them. And the DOJ isn't going to save them, because, everyone for Trump is ultimately disposable. Everyone for Trump is ultimately like, oh, yeah, I kind of knew him. He was a coffee boy. He was an intern. He, barely in our world. And you can see that with Elon. Elon he didn't do anything. I ordered that all. And now that he's gone, he's done a great job, I guess. But, remember, Steve Bannon elected Trump in 2016. And 9 months after that election, Trump was calling him Scabby Steve Bannon, a dirty loser. I never knew him. He did nothing for me. And Musk could be in the same boat at some point. If it hurts Trump, remember, he's got a great feral nose for all of these sensitivities that he has about whether or not somebody is a plus or a minus column for him.
But Rick, that kind of brings up, if you look at the whole division, Bannon with the MAGA voters, base, Elon with the money, going into 2026, and you look at the 8 or 9 or 10 House races that they must win to stay in power. Which are they going to need more, Elon's money or MAGA voters? So I mean, this is where it could be that's where it happens, because where it finally comes to a head, because at some point, I don't think the money is going to, in those races, in a House race, okay, he writes a $40 million check.
Right.
I'm not sure against when you've taken everything and dumped on the entire agenda of MAGA with HB1 visas, et cetera, whether money's going to make the difference. So it may be that it's that 26 election that creates the foundation for where the all-out fight happens. And by the way, I think if you split that up, then that's also a problem. And if you split those two groups up, I'm not sure the votes are there to for Trumpism to succeed. So that's where the I think continuing. Look, one of the things I've always believed, I'd like to get your take on it, is we need to slow everything up. So they're moving so fast. Sand in the gears, judicial challenges, friction, Schatz saying he'll hold up nominees, everything that anybody can do to slow it up, but also drive a wedge between the factions in the Trump coalition, so that when 26 happens, we've all, we have a chance to take the House back, which then puts real sand in the gears and really stalls it out.
Right.
Right. And that might stop Elon, but otherwise, I don't know what will.
So before we wrap up tonight, Brooke, I want to ask you, where can people find you on social media, and where can they find your writing?
Oh, thank you for asking. I'm on Blue Sky at EB Harrington, and I also have a web page, www.brookeharrington.com, where you can find my new book, Offshore. Of course, that's for sale in the usual places like Bookshop and Barnes & Noble and Amazon. But you can also find all the magazine and newspaper articles I've written. And if you're a real glutton for punishment, you can read the academic journal articles too.
Well, Brooke, thank you so much for coming on the show tonight. Folks, thank you for supporting Resolute Square. You can catch Joe Trippi on That Trippi Show. You can catch me on both the Enemies List podcast and the Lincoln Project podcast. Also, you can catch me on my Substack. You can catch Maya May on Punching Up, Decoding Fox News with Julia Jeske. And stay tuned for a lot of interesting news coming out for Resolute in the next couple of weeks. I think you're going to be really excited about some of it. And we look forward to talking to you guys again next Tuesday night on the Strategy Session.